let's install the brand new 7800 XT inside our gaming PC. Ladies and gentlemen, is this the one? The graphics card of the generation we have been waiting for. This is the brand new launch of the 7800 XT, a graphics card that is going to cost around about $499. Still a lot of money, but compared to everything that Nvidia has been throwing us over the last, that's a very good question, long time, it is definitely very refreshing to see something that is actually all about high refresh 1440p for what I would call an accessible price point for anyone that is serious about PC gaming. Oh, and I completely forgot to mention, it undercuts the 4070 by $100 and is meant to have even more performance. Is this thing too good to be true? Well, throughout this video, we're going to be answering just that. We're going to be doing ourselves a pretty epic little PC build, trying to keep costs down as low as possible while still maintaining performance. We'll be showing you what's hot, what's not, and of course show you those all-important gameplay benchmark numbers so you know exactly how this thing performs. So is this thing going to be any good? Let's find out after a short word from this video sponsor.
Corsair's K70 Max is a game changer for mechanical keyboards. Forget about what color switch to go for. Corsair's new MGX switches lets you customize the actuation point of your keyboard. Want a super soft touch for fast reactions, or do you prefer more force to stop mistakes? Ultimately, the choice is all down to you. Learn more about the K70 Max today with the link down below.
Rightio then, ladies and gentlemen, let's get this under the overhead and actually get this thing unboxed. So here comes the moment of truth as we take this out of the box. And don't forget as well, I've actually toured the Power Color factory. So in theory, I've seen exactly where this thing has come from. I haven't actually seen this yet, and I haven't done my benchmarking. Actually, this is a very valid point because by the time you're watching this video, Editor Carl will have had his hands on this, and we should have our performance numbers. So we will be showing you the full benchmarks of this and the 7700 XT a little bit later in this video. But for now, you and I can enjoy this experience together. And here it is. This is actually, I guess, what I expected really. I mean, if you look at the top here, you've got two 8-pins. The minimum power recommendation for this is 700 watts, so you're probably looking at 750 like we're doing later today. But of course, this isn't a PCI Gen 5 connection, so you don't have to worry about it being particularly up to date. So you've got this little switch here, that's for your BIOS to choose between like a quiet and a bit more of a performance mode. And exactly what I thought might happen has just happened, and my voice has now decided to go. It's actually true that I only just got back from Malaysia yesterday, and I am absolutely knackered, but that will not stop me from filming this video, so you get to experience the AMD launch. It's not like anyone else would tell you about the card. But hey, you want the entertainment, so do I. I obviously love tech as much as you guys. One of the main changes that we have here is the inclusion of DisplayPort 2.1. Not many monitors really that will take advantage of this at the moment, but this is going to be useful if you do want to upgrade a little bit later to something like the brand new Samsung Odyssey Neo G9, is it? That's like two 4K monitors sandwiched together in one thing. It's pretty cool, but don't let AMD's marketing fool you too much. I don't think it's going to affect most buyers, but it's definitely something that's nice to have, and it probably should have been on those Nvidia cards. We've got an LED light strip on the top of this one as well, and if you look closely, you also have a 3-pin addressable on the top as well, if you want to daisy chain this and have everything synchronized. The last couple of things to note before we press onto our build is that in terms of our size comparison, obviously it is a lot smaller than the 4070 FE, but then this is a third party, so this is kind of apples to oranges really. If you do want an apples to apples test versus something that's a bit more high end, this is a 7900 XTX. This is the Asus Tough Edition, and you can see that this is suddenly a lot smaller than something that is a lot more high-end. So this should fit in most cases. It will definitely fit in the one that we're using today, but obviously do check, because compared to cards from like 5 years ago, this is obviously still quite a lot larger. So yes, that is the new card, but obviously today there's a lot more going on than just the raw performance of that. If you do want to skip to that, you can just fast forward this video, but that would make us sad. Instead, you want to stick around to see the full build, because as I mentioned in the intro to this, I wanted to go with something that sort of matched the overall theme of this GPU, which is to maximize performance whilst having the lowest cost possible, really. And one of the best ways of doing this is to go for Micro ATX, and this is a chassis we've used a few times on the channel, and it is one of the best things out there. The only caveat is that you obviously can't really see inside. You get a bit of RGB illumination, but if you're okay with that, you get so much case for your money, and you don't have to worry about having the best coolers and the most visual parts, because we can't really see it anyway. So as long as you're happy with that, this is a great way to save yourself some money. This is the Asus Prime case. It's the AP201, I believe. Comes in black or white. Both side panels are completely toolless. The host of this video is completely clueless. I mean, I'm not, because I've built this twice. And the front also comes off as well. And you do have to get a little bit creative when you're building in this, so I would advise reading the manual, but it's actually a very easy chassis to build inside as well. And I also like the fact that you do get USB Type-C and 2 USB-A's as well. Obviously, yes, we have come to expect this, but for around about £90, you'd be surprised how many cases still don't offer this. In order to kick off our build, we are of course going to need a motherboard, and this is one from ASRock, is the B760M Steel Legend. Again, sort of going with the theme, this is all about maximum performance without having to pay stupid amounts of money. Intel motherboards, they can be a little bit cheaper than AMD Ryzen. The CPUs can also be a little bit cheaper than the equivalent Ryzen. Some of them have a few more cores, but honestly, it is going to be worth doing quite a lot of research to find the right CPU for you. I would say that this is pretty much the right balance actually for this particular build, which is why we're using it. But if you can find like a great offer on something like a 7800X3D, you want to be a bit more future-proof, maybe you've got motherboard that you've seen on sale or something, or there's a bundle. There are so many different things to consider. But the good news really is that both AMD and Intel are brilliant options, so don't stress too much about which way to go. The main difference really is that this is not going to be as upgradable as the new AM5 boards from AMD, so do bear this in mind. And you have to admit that this is a very attractive motherboard. A lot of people will appreciate the theme here of black and white. There's not masses of USB on the back, but there should be enough for most buyers. It does also have Wi-Fi, which is going to be really useful, especially in micro ATX, because you're not necessarily going to have the room to put in an external slot-in card, so that's nice to see. You've got space here for 3 SSDs, though only 2 of them have a heatsink. You've got 2 8-pins at the top if you do want to put a lot of power into your CPU, but the feature set on this board, generally speaking, is actually pretty nice. So let's plop this down, open up our slot, and then we can talk about the CPU. And things have changed a little bit over the last few years because, well, I'll start by saying that the branding on this Intel could use some work. I mean, it almost looks like it was written by me. But this chip is the i7-13700K, and you might be thinking this is a bit of a weird choice when you can't overclock it, but actually the clocks on this are slightly higher than they are on the base non-K version. I would say it's all going to come down to price really, because if the price is fairly similar, then it is going to be worth getting the K. It might also give you a little bit better resale value as well, but if you can get the non-K version and you don't mind it being ever so slightly slower, that's also worth considering too. We will of course also need to grab ourselves some memory. This is a kit from Kingston. We see it quite a lot on the channel actually because it just works. It's usually available at a decent price. This is 6000 megahertz, it's 32 gigabytes, and it comes in XMP, which is perfect for our Intel platform. The main thing of course to bear in mind though is that this is DDR5 memory, not DDR4, and the two are not cross-compatible. So if you're doing an older build and moving it across, or you want to buy the cheapest RAM possible, please be aware it is going to have to be DDR5 or it is not going to work in your rig, and you're going to be very, very sad when you're playing Fortnite on your phone. What else do we need? An SSD. This is one I bought myself because it seems to always be on sale. This is one from Crucial, and it's called the P3 Plus. And this particular one is 1 terabyte in capacity, which is fantastic for a starter PC. And you can usually find these around about £50 or so. But as I say in pretty much all the videos these days, there's usually something that's on a very good offer. So I would always do a lot of shopping around. So let's get our Gen 5 drive installed, plop that down, and then return our heatsink. And then once that's done, we can move on to our cooler. And this is one from Deepcool that there's actually quite a lot of hype around, because this is all about having loads of performance, loads of cooling capacity, but again, without costing you an arm and a leg. And I'll be honest, I think this is going to be very large, but I have checked the specs, and it should just about fit in our case. And I mean, I was thinking about this for quite a while actually, because these days pretty much all of the builds we do, and something you guys are always asking for, is all-in-one liquid coolers. But these days some of them get so expensive. You're looking at like £300, maybe even more if you want like the top Corsair one that has all the fancy RGB fans and all of this stuff. Whereas if you buy a case like this, that you can still fit a large cooler inside, but you've not got to worry about it looking the absolute prettiest and you just want the performance, then you can probably save yourself about £200 and go for this. Makes a lot of sense, no? But the question is, how easy is this going to be to install? I mean, they give you a screwdriver, and just because it's easy to install doesn't make it good. Remember the Corsair one that we saw a few years ago? That was probably the easiest I've ever used, but relative to price to performance, it wasn't quite there. And step one is to install the backplate. This is business as usual. If you've ever built an Intel PC, this will be very natural. drops into place. Look. Then we use these screwy nuts. We insert the bracket over the top. Then we can fix this down into place. Then we need to grab our tube of thermal paste that comes with the cooler, and I actually prefer them doing it like this, rather than giving you like one non-reusable bit. If this was Ryzen, I'd probably put another couple of dots there, but it's not as important with Intel. Then the top piece should just come off like that. The fan pulls out. Okay, that's interesting. Then if you've done everything right, this should just fit down on top of your mount. Give it just a little bit of a screw on the top. Try and do equal force on the bottom, then move over to the top. This will help with the thermal paste and to make sure you're not stressing out that CPU socket. Fan can then go back in, just like that. That is very easy actually. Other fan goes back on, and it's nice as well that we seem to have the perfect amount of clearance with that RAM. Pop the top back on. This cable is down the bottom left where you want it to be the top right. So have I done that upside down? Yes. So let's rotate this once again, and then we can actually connect everything up. Look, you've got two fans that plug into the splitter, and then this one CPU fan connection that goes onto the board. And you can control this in your motherboard software, but they do also give you this little dial up here at the top, where you can choose between silent mode and performance mode. Basically, one very large cooler with some motherboard attached to it. I mean, I don't actually even like holding it like that because of the weight distribution. But it is now going to be moment of truth, because if this does fit inside our chassis, this is going to be one dense, powerful rig. But of course, I'm still a little bit nervous because we don't actually know where this fits in yet. As I say, on paper, it says it should. There we go. That is borderline. And in theory, I mean, there's not much in it, but it fits. I am going to take this fan out the back though, because we just don't need that. It's going to be worth putting that somewhere else. Then we can almost perform some surgery by grabbing these little cables. We've got our USB 3, our power reset, and somewhere we have our USB Type-C. Our USB-A goes here. Just below that is our USB-C. Any extra fans and things are these little headers dotted around the motherboard. Power reset is down here, and then our HD audio is at the bottom left. So this is what we're looking like at this stage. You can see quite nice and neat and tidy, considering the amount of hardware we've already got inside here. But obviously the next component is going to make things slightly tricky. The power supply. I mean, I say tricky, I don't think it's going to be a problem in this, because as I say, I've used this before and I know it is actually quite easy to maintain. But the secret really is to use a modular power supply here, because if you go for something that has loads and loads of cables, you are going to have to stuff them in here somewhere, which granted might not matter in a case like this, but as soon as you start adding fans and things down the bottom, there's not really going to be that much extra room for extra cables and things, so bear this in mind. As for the exact model of power supply, here we're going for one from Corsair. It's a more budget-friendly one. It's the CX750F RGB. I mean, I think they kind of tried to put RGB on a power supply and then maybe realized that it wasn't necessary. But I love this thing because while it's not the absolute best out there, you get cables in the box that actually look quite good, especially if you go for this white version, because it sort of brings everything together. Not that we're going to see that today, but fundamentally you can buy 750 watts or maybe even 850 watts of power in a very affordable price, but stock is a little bit all over the place on this one, so I'll leave a few other suggestions down in the description below if you can't find this exact model. The power supply neatly slides in like that and then requires a little screw at the top. We can then connect all of our cables. We can then start feeding all of the cables to their respective positions, with these ones being the ATX and the CPU. I do also want to use the other fan that we have. It seems a waste not to use it. Just use the original 4 screws to get this safe and secure. Before I forget, we do of course need to plug our power supply extension cable in and make sure it's turned on. And then I think it's time for the moment you have been waiting for, the graphics card. Let's install the brand new 7800 XT inside our gaming PC. Let's see how much length we have available. Looks like quite a lot. You can actually move this power supply as well. If you move it down, then you get more room at the top. You can actually put up to a 360 rad in here, but you would probably need to go for something a bit smaller. Let's get this screwed down, powered up, and then realize that we've got loads of cables that we're going to need to stow, and once again say that white cables was not the way to go for this. I mean, actually, I don't think it is as bad as it looks, because once you've added this little bar in, yeah, look, there you go. That's already looking a lot neater. And you could easily put some extra fans down the bottom as well if you really did want to maximize airflow. I mean, if we'd gone for a power supply with black cables, I really don't think there would be that much more I would want to change. I mean, even the fact that they have this nice sort of flat cable really does work here, because when I get our side panel, in theory, you're not really going to have any clearance issues at all. You're not Okay, you are going to see those white cables. Forget about the white cables, pretend they're black. Yeah, that's not ideal actually, is it? Or you could have gone for the white chassis and then this would be the perfect solution. So, And that, I think, is our 7800 XT rig complete. We've been waiting a long time for this, haven't we? But yeah, I'm actually really happy with this. And I do think once we turn the front on as well, it'll be nice to have a little bit of illumination. So let's try just that, shall we? We will, of course, grab ourselves our mouse, keyboard, and you guessed it by now, the one and only PC-centric mouse mat, available linked down below. I mean, just look at this. Why wouldn't you want this in your life? PCcentric.store. Here comes the nerve-wracking bit. Well, it definitely powered on, that's good. Whoa, okay, that is a lot of RGB from that card. Genuinely, I love that in this chassis. The whole thing comes alive. You don't need to rely on an RGB power supply. That really works here, doesn't it? But are we actually gonna get something on display? Yes, we did it. Well, I say we did it. Let's hope it actually loads properly. I think I already do have a copy of Windows on this drive as well, so in theory, it should just boot in. Yes! Just like that. Obviously, I'm well aware that for most of you guys watching, this won't be the case, so you'll probably get to the BIOS screen. Here you need to turn the XMP profile on to profile 1, which is our 6000 megahertz speed. I've set CPU fan 1 to be silent. I'll set a custom fan profile for our secondary fan. And then I believe somewhere in our OC tweaker, we should be able to adjust the power. And yes, we've got all of these settings down here. So we've got our power limits for like a long duration, and then our short duration as well. So you can change these around if you want, but the default is 253 and 125 in this motherboard respectively. So this should be okay. Let's turn this up though to 300 on the max and 175 on the long. Then we will save and exit, and we will see you in the games. Ladies and gentlemen, it is game time. We are all set up and ready to go. I mean, the PC is, my voice sadly isn't, it's almost got worse, but regardless, here we are, and I have to say, I still do really like the look of this thing. I mean, I probably would change all of the RGB maybe just to one color, so it's slightly more subtle, like this red bar down the bottom I really like. But overall, I think we've done a good job, and as long as the thermals are all right, I think this is going to be very easy to recommend. But let's start by jumping into a title, shall we? And what you're seeing here is the most recent game in our test suite. This is Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. I almost said Rift in Time again. I know I got that wrong in the last video. I'm sorry. But this is actually a pretty spectacular experience, actually, because this is running at 4K, not 1440p. We do have FSR set to quality. And to be fair, this is one of the main differences, really, between the NVIDIA cards, especially the 4070, and of course the 7800 XT, is that this won't support DLSS, Super Resolution, and DLSS 3 frame generation. But as long as you're okay with that, you're typically going to find that your frame rate is actually a little bit higher than you'd get with the 4070, which is pretty cool, bearing in mind that's also a much more expensive GPU. But FSR does seem to work quite well here. I mean, the quality is pretty much indistinguishable actually from 4K, but you can't use the frame generation feature that is actually baked into this game. Though to be fair, I have actually noticed that frame generation seems to be a lot more buggy on the 4070 than it does on like the 70 Ti, the 80 and the 90. Whether that is something that's to do with the lower power of those cards, I'm not entirely sure, but it is consistent. I have seen this quite a few times actually, which is a little bit disappointing. But regardless, clearly you can see here that the 7800 XT is doing a fantastic job. But I mean, this is the very high preset, so you can't really go that much above this unless you want to turn on ray tracing. So let's do exactly that. We'll navigate over to the options menu, we'll move over to graphics, and here, as I said, everything is set to very high, but we can turn on some ray trace reflections, because I know this will completely fall apart if we turn all of them on. And initially we're seeing some very buggy results. I mean, the frame rate was dropping there to around about 20, 25 FPS. But interestingly, after you've sort of let it catch up with itself, you can see that our frame rate has now gone back up to around about 60 FPS, which is actually pretty good. I mean, especially if you are going to use a controller, this is very, very playable. But if you are going to run into stutters and things like that, yeah, it's not exactly the best experience here. I do think it is partly down to the game, so it's not all like AMD's fault, but sometimes you're going to get 30 frames a second, sometimes you're going to get 50 or 60, so if it was me, I'd just turn the ray tracing off. But I mean, to be fair, this is a card that is geared towards 1440p, so let's change it down to 1440. We'll keep the exact same graphic settings and we'll see if that makes any difference. Well, it certainly appears so. We're now getting around about 90 to 100 frames a second. Oh, okay, that's a weird one. I haven't seen this before. A problem has occurred with your graphics driver. I think we should press on. But let's move on to something completely different now, shall we? With some Diablo 4. And I must confess, I played this religiously for literally hours and hours and hours, and then I sort of got a little bit bored and moved on to something else, but it's time for me to come back to this actually. I mean, I still haven't explored all of the map. You can see how far I have got. But more importantly, let's talk about performance, because this is obviously a title that will vary depending on what you've got on screen. As soon as you start battling quite a lot of enemies, it's going to get a lot more intensive for both the GPU and the CPU. But running this at native 4K resolution without FSR, that you can actually enable in the game if you want to do this, we're currently getting around about 95 frames a second or so. So it's, you know, pretty good. I don't really think anyone needs any more FPS in Diablo. Yes, if you're going to be playing like mega competitively, but realistically it's not really that sort of title. I mean, here you can see now we've got loads of effects going on. Is this really going to change the frame rate? Not really actually. The lowest will drop down there too. Was around about 87, and this is one of the benefits of having a very powerful CPU and GPU. It does give you the headroom really, so when things do start to get a little bit more intense, your frame rate isn't going to completely suffer and falter, shall we say. But let's press on to the most intense title that we have in our suite. This is Cyberpunk 2077, and this is filmed just before the big update that's coming with Phantom Liberty and all of that stuff. But this is running at 4K, and the reason that I wanted to have NVIDIA frame view at the top right corner of your screen is so I could show you the PC latency, but I'd say take this with a fair pinch of salt, because I've used this game quite a lot and I am not convinced that that is the right amount of latency. I think it's taking the recording into account. We're recording this with AV1 like we do on sort of all of the tests. We record it baked into the GPU so we can give you like a real world performance metric whilst it's recording. But yeah, I don't think that is quite right, because the game actually feels pretty responsive really. We're getting around about 58 to 60 FPS running at 4K with FSR set to quality. So things are going to fall apart when we turn on ray tracing, but if you're happy to not have ray tracing enabled, then honestly I think you'll be very, very happy with the performance levels of this, especially if you are going to be using a controller. But let's have a look, shall we, what happens if we turn some ray tracing on. Go into the settings, ray tracing, and we will have reflections only. Ray tracing is now enabled. The game looks noticeably better, but as you can see, our frame rate has dropped by around about 10-15 frames a second or so. So that's actually not too bad. I mean, the AMD cards of yesteryear wouldn't have performed as well as this. This is still a pretty cool experience, but we are now in the realms of a game that does not feel as nice to play. The latency has definitely increased now. So this is going to be something that's like nice to use, but it's not for 4K gaming. So let's see what happens if we turn this down to 1440p. We keep the exact same settings with those ray traced reflections, and how are we doing? Much, much better. Now we're getting around about 70 frames a second or so. So yes, if you are playing this 1440p on an AMD card, then you can play it with ray tracing enabled. Whether you value ray tracing that much is obviously still down to you, and this is going to be the big advantage of the 4070 over this card. It is going to be its ray tracing performance, things like DLSS 3.5, but there are going to be plenty of games that will perform better on this GPU. I do think NVIDIA need to lower their prices. But let's press on to our multiplayer title. I am the jump master, so let us jump. And this is running just under max settings. Everything is cranked other than sunspot detail, which is set to very high rather than insane. And we're running this at 4K resolution. And as you can see, our frame rate is pretty much through the roof. We're getting around about 150 frames a second as we sort of need to frantically run around and find some weaponry. Oh, now I'm being popped. But I've said this before and I'll say it again, obviously playing Apex Legends at 4K isn't really the sort of thing most people are going to want to do / need to do, because you're always going to want to favor higher frame rates. So we will turn this down to 1440p as soon as I've got out of this. There we go, yes, squad eliminated. And indeed, turning this down to 1440p has yielded much greater levels of frame rate. We're now actually getting around about 200 to 250 frames a second, which obviously for a game like Apex is phenomenal. This is going to mean that you can grab yourself a high refresh monitor and really take full advantage of it. The only bug that I'm seeing at the moment, for whatever reason, is that Apex Legends, when you turn it down from full screen or 4K full screen down to 1440p full screen, it seems to have made the whole monitor go back to 60 Hz, which is a little bit of a weird one. And this is something I've seen quite a few times actually with AMD graphics cards. I don't have problems with them, but sometimes you will find that you have some sort of like display issue type things. And these are often fixed with like driver updates and things, but it definitely is something that I've seen before. If you're trying to down res from 4K to 1440, it doesn't always work as intended. You get a few different weird quirks with different games. It's weird. But other than that though, there's not really anything real negative to report. I mean, noise levels, thermals and acoustics are all very, very good. And in terms of acoustics, there's basically no noise whatsoever, which is very impressive. Bear in mind, this is sort of open frame almost, and it's located to you, well, it's right next to you. So this is another reason why you don't really need to worry about adding extra fans and things. There's plenty of ventilation here. Overall, I'd say I'm really happy with the system. It just needs a couple of tweaks with like the cables and RGB and things. But obviously, I do want to talk properly about the graphics cards, and I'm not going to be able to do that in this precise seat at the moment because I haven't seen all the results. So let me hand you over to someone that has. The one, the only, Benchmarkers. Hello everybody and welcome back to Benchmarkers. It's been a while and here we are to bring you these beautiful numbers. And indeed, actually across the board for the 7800 XT, things are looking pretty good when you compare it to Nvidia. I have to say, it's only really this dramatic graph of Cyberpunk in what I would say is the most Nvidia-centric test that we have, which is all of the features turned on that you can see AMD really doesn't perform very well. But in pretty much every other test, this card is on it. Yes, the ray tracing isn't going to be the best here. Nvidia is going to be better, but realistically, if you want around about 100 frames a second, 1440p, and in some cases much, much higher than that, I definitely think that the 7700 XT should be at least $50 cheaper or so. But anyway, that is a topic for a future video. But in terms of average FPS, I think you're going to be very happy across the board. And when it comes to cost per frame, well, AMD are light years ahead. I mean, just look at the top of the graph. It's both the new cards. I mean, granted, there's not much in it. Even the RTX 4060, that is pretty much wildly hated, is up here. But don't forget that that card has a lot less VRAM. And again, this is one of the main differences between the 7700 and the 7800 is that 16 versus 12. If I was a betting man, though, I'd wager you're going to be most interested in the 1440p numbers. And here we can see that AMD's older stock is still at the top of the charts. This is definitely the way to go if you want to pick up a very big bargain. But there's not actually that much in it really, all the way up to something like the RTX 4060 that once again with 8GB of VRAM is going to cause you some problems a little bit later down the line. But the main thing I really want to draw your attention to is just the dramatic difference between the more expensive Nvidia cards and then the AMD offerings. AMD is definitely the king when it comes to value, and if you do value over everything else, then clearly this is going to be the best way to go. Of course, we can't leave this without showing you the 1080p numbers that are actually a little bit more bunched together. It's a bit more even really across the board, but still something like the 4070 that is going to be one of the main competitors for this is just nowhere close to this in any of the charts. Yes, the performance in Cyberpunk and any game with DLSS 3 and ray tracing is going to be far superior on the 4070, and that is going to be the best bet if you want to play those games. But pretty much for everyone else, I would strongly consider you look at AMD because it is just a superior card really when it comes to outright value and price to performance. That being said, there is a little bit of a hidden tax in all of this, and that is when it comes to graphics card power consumption, because AMD has never been the absolute best. Well, I mean, it might have been at some point, but not recently anyway when it comes to performance for the amount of power that it uses, and this time is no different. You can see both the 7700 XT and the 7800 XT don't use masses of power, but when you compare them to the 4070 and the 4060 Ti that they're meant to be competing with, there is actually a lot of difference here. I'd like to emphasize though that this is the maximum, and the real world average that you might use will vary a little bit, but this represents the maximum graphics card power that we measured during our tests. So there we are then, pretty much everything you need to know about the 7800 XT. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts on this rig as a whole. Is this the sort of thing that would pique your interest? Do you like the case? Do you loathe it? Do you think this is a cracking GPU, or would you rather go for Nvidia? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, so let us know down in the comment section below. Smash the like button if you've enjoyed this, get yourself subscribed, and of course, as always, if you are interested in current pricing on anything featured in this video, you can find it linked down below with my Amazon affiliate links.
And while you're down there, why not bask in the glory of Corsair's K70 Max? This epic keyboard puts you in full control of the actuation force for complete customizability. You can even assign 2 different actions to each key press, one for a light tap, another for a heavy. The board also packs per key RGB lighting, super smooth media controls, and Axon processing for up to 8000 Hz of polling rate. Get your game on today with the link down below.
Thank you so much for watching this video. We'll catch you in the next one.